I'm here today with my friend Danny Seaman from Israel. Danny has a podcast in Israel, served in the IDF, also serves as a spokesman with the Israeli government. Danny, welcome.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, John.
So, Danny, I think what we'd like to do this morning is an impossible task, is sort of bring some sense to everything that's happened in the Middle East. I know we did a podcast, I don't know, a few weeks ago, maybe. And since we did that podcast a few weeks ago, I could only describe what's happened in the Middle East as, I think I saw one commentator describe it as tectonic and earthquake, and
that was probably me. That's the terminology I've been using.
Okay. Well, then, everything kind of blends together. So, let's just go back a little bit. What's happened in the last couple of weeks with Syria, and why and how, if that relates to Lebanon and that sort of thing. Tell us what happened.
Well, it's quite clear that what we're witnessing right now is really tectonic changes. We're talking about the complete, I won't say erasing, but putting an end to the 20th century, at least the results of World War I, in which you had the fall of, at that time, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which controlled the Middle East, and the moving in of Western powers such as Britain and France, and they more or less divided up, according to their own interests, the Middle East at the time in what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And France had control over what is created Syria and Lebanon. Britain had control over what they called the Palestine, the land of Israel, Palestine, which was both parts of the Jordan River, and for years had been under Ottoman Empire control. And then subsequently, in the years after that, and after World War II, you had the creations of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, of course, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the State of Israel. And more or less, these countries were based on that decisions made over 100 years ago, where you see that the considerations regarding the Arab countries, and you can also say to a degree what happened here in Israel, didn't take into consideration, though, again, I step back for a moment. The considerations in Israel did take this into account, the fact that you have both Jewish and Arabs here, and they did, after World War II, offer both the Jews and Arabs a state. The Arabs rejected that. When everybody is whining about Israel and occupation and all this nonsense all the time, they tend to ignore the fact that the international community not only offered, but created a two-state solution here that the Arabs not only rejected, which was their right, they're more than welcome to reject it. And this was done by the UN General Assembly, which is not binding, mind you. Though they rejected it, which is their right. What they did not have a right to, and everybody's very quick to quote international law, was to assault Israel and attack Israel. 7 Arab countries who outnumbered Israel 1,000 to 1 back in the day, they attacked Israel and they lost. And they lost the ability. They still had 20 years to create an Arab state in the areas of Judea and Samaria and Gaza. Only Egypt and Jordan refused to do so. So things are a bit more complex than those demonstrators will tell you. But you also had similarities going on in Iraq when you had Shia and Sunni populations there. You had non-Muslim entities such as the Kurds living in there. And then you had the Kurds and the Turks in the northern areas of Syria. And in Syria itself, you had Sunni and Shia, and you had the Alawites, which are a sect of Shia, which are more close to the Iranians. And then you had Lebanon, of course, which had a Christian majority for generations. And you had Sunni Muslims, but also up until about 30 years ago, during the revolution, 40 years ago already, 40 years already, you had the rise of the Shia, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And then to this day, they've taken total control over Lebanon. So when the Europeans never took into full account the different minorities that live in all these countries, and we're talking about huge minorities. For example, the Druze, who nobody talks about, the Druze, for example, were neither Jewish nor Christian nor Muslim. They're an Arab sect. They themselves in Syria, they number around 6 million. And bordering with Israel, there are about 1 million Druze who border in Syria along with Israel. And I mentioned that because they've offered and they've asked Israel to take control, and they want to become part of Israel right now, which is a very interesting point. Maybe we'll touch upon later. But you have these different sects and different peoples that were never given consideration, and they lived under the authority of these countries, which could be fine. Here in Israel, for example, you have Jews and Christians and Muslims living very in very harmony, if you want to call it that, harmoniously, unlike any place anywhere in the Middle East. In other countries, it doesn't happen because you have these totalitarian regimes who do not have a democracy there. And not only are they not democratic, they're also very violent and very oppressive towards the minorities there. So those waving the flags against Israel and warning the world about Israel, Arabs have full rights in the state of Israel. Arabs share in government, they share in the military they serve, etc. In Arab countries, this doesn't happen. So there have been a lot of tensions going on for many years, which finally erupted over 10 years ago in what they called the Arab Spring. But again, this was applying Western terminology and Western way of thinking to the Middle East. You don't have the Arab Spring like you have the Spring of Nations back in the 19th century in Europe. This is not what was happening here. You had oppressed minorities in some places, such in Syria, an oppressed majority that are oppressed by the Alawite minority rising up. But then you had a combination of Shia Muslims under the control and guidance of Iran in Lebanon, joining forces and fighting off these different elements in Syria and putting down their attempt to overthrow the Assad regime. And that lasted for 10 years. This battle has been going on. They oppressed it very quickly about 10 years ago, killing over 500,000, at least the number that we know of, 500,000 Syrians, putting many in jails that we're seeing being released from these jails after 10 years in the past in the past 2 weeks. So what happened here in the past, since the war broke out a year ago, was that the Iranian plan, which was basically behind this whole thing, there was an Iranian plan building up, which they had hoped would have been an assault from 3 different borders against Israel, Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iraqi Shia forces in Syria itself, which they were supporting, the Houthis as well from Yemen. They were expecting one day to assault Israel. I guess we can say that we were fortunate for whatever reason it was. We know that what has been revealed in the past year and 3 months is that just like in Gaza, the Hezbollah were building tunnels in Lebanon itself. But for some reason, and we still have to figure that out, Hamas prematurely attacked Israel. They were very successful in that attack. They caught us by surprise. They perhaps tempted by what they perceived as being a weakness in Israel. And in the first few months, Israel was literally in shock. We were able to get them out of Israel within 3 days, but nothing like this had ever occurred to Israel in the past. Even the Yom Kippur War, you didn't have a situation where the Arabs had taken over Jewish, since our independence war back in 48, you never had a situation where Jewish towns and Israeli citizens were taken over by Arabs, especially by ruthless, murderous terrorists like the Hamas. Since then, Israel has gathered itself together, and we were also planning against the Iranians, knowing, and you can see this by things that happened in Lebanon. And I mention this because a lot of people ask this question. I'm already jumping forward. How, if Israel knew to take care of Hezbollah and could do what it's doing against Syria and knew how to take out Nasrallah, how do we did not know what was happening in Gaza? And how do we not know what's happening with the hostages today? So I think it's very important to realize there are 2 things happening here. The organization within Israel responsible for preparing for what we knew was going to be an assault by Iran had been the Mossad for many years. And they've had about 20 years to prepare for this. With regards to Gaza and the Hamas, Israel has only had the past few years to prepare for the possibility, and this was under the control of the Shin Bet, who was more like our FBI. And they utterly failed. Well, as Mossad, as we can see, their preparation was beyond imagination and beyond anything anybody could think of. We did have, thanks to the Hamas, the opportunity to prepare and take actions over the months. And I know here in Israel, there was a lot of complaints. Why is Israel not responding to Hezbollah, who are firing missiles at us since October 7th, 2023, until May, June this year? Why did we not take action? We now know that Israel was operating in South Lebanon, was taking care of that. And then finally, when we were confident that things with Gaza are under control, we could direct our attention to Lebanon. And we did take out this Hezbollah literally within a few hours. Everything since then has been just tidying up and finishing off the remnants. But I mention this because it's important to know that these same Syrian organizations, whether they're connected to ISIS or not, who for 10 years could not stand up to the Hezbollah. This was basically Hezbollah being used by the Syrian military and by the Syrian regime. They couldn't do a thing against them. And Israel took care of them in a matter of hours. And to the point where suddenly these organizations realized that, hey, they knew better than even we knew in the West that Hezbollah is finished. There is no protection for the Syrian regime. Iran turned out to be complete empty of any threats that it made in the past. And they rose to that occasion and took advantage of it. Now, this happened only after Israel stopped its actions and activities, both in Lebanon and in Syria, against the efforts of, because Iran was moving in weapons, ammunitions, and forces through Syria into Lebanon. So Israel could, once they had this ceasefire that was announced, this cleared the area in Syria for these anti-government organizations to stand up. And these organizations that are not only supported by the Iranians, but also by, and more importantly, by Russia. So in a way, the United States needed Israel once it had taken care and there was no immediate real threat from Hezbollah to Israel. They needed us to back off a little, to let these Syrian elements take over Syria. For us, the benefit from this was, as you can see right now, and I say this was realized by the Prime Minister, and talking to some, for my own radio show in Israel, I spoke to some, I won't say who exactly, but I got the insights that the Prime Minister realized that we have a unique opportunity of removing one of the greatest threats to Israel. Syria had a very formidable military there. And once they refused to take arms against their own civilians and didn't want to go through realizing and seeing what had happened to Hezbollah, they decided to move back and in a way vacated their military installations and their missile installations, their chemical weapons factories, all these things that posed a threat to Israel. The Prime Minister realized, Netanyahu realized, that we'd have an opportunity, there would be no second to it, to totally get rid of the military abilities of Syria, that they would know, not only would they themselves not pose a threat to us, but anybody taking over Syria would not have these abilities to pose a threat to Israel in the future. So that's where we stand at the moment, and that's what is happening here in the Middle East.
Well, let me unpack that a little bit more. So what I understand you to say is that, well, I'll make 2 points, at least based on my own research and listening to a lot of different people. By the way, I will say this, that maybe the biggest cottage industry in social media land and YouTube land is people putting up videos opining on the geopolitical consequences of the Syrian government collapse. I mean, the number of videos and things that have been done are just unbelievable. And you're getting it from all sorts of different perspectives, and some very good information and some very bad information. But it appears to me that what happened to Israel with regard to Gaza that didn't seem to happen in the north as much was that Israel had better human intel in the north than they did in the south. Is that a fair statement, do you think?
No, we had as much intel in the south. Again, the failure of the military intelligence and the Shabak to translate this information and to understand where they were going with it is something that still has to be investigated by the authorities here in Israel. Prime Minister at the moment wants to focus on finishing this war, getting rid of the threats, immediate and future threats to Israel, and the greatest threat still has not been removed and will be removed in the next few weeks. Once that happens, then we can address the failures that happen in Israel and which, under other circumstances, could have very much cost us our very existence. And people have to understand this. Had Hezbollah joined Hamas on that day and invaded Israel in the north with 30,000, not 6,000, and we know today that there may have been around 8,000, even if you add civilians who followed through with the Hamas, but had Hezbollah, who were better trained and had better weapons, had they invaded the north of Israel, we may not have had a state of Israel today. Or you may have had an intervention by the United States to move in and stop the onslaught by Hezbollah. That could have very well have been a consequence of that day. So for whatever reasons, I think October 7th turned out to be very fortunate for us, because at first the assault was not as grave as planned by the Iranians. And second, it allowed us to finally address those threats to the state of Israel. And also a lot of things that people, nobody believed that Israel could maintain a battle against the Arabs for longer. The longest war we had was 3 weeks with major militaries, was 3 weeks during the Yom Kippur War with Syria and Egypt. In the Lebanon War, which I fought in back in 1982, we were also about 3 to 4 weeks. But since then, we have not engaged more than a month, perhaps, in tit-for-tat operations and responses to what was happening either with Hezbollah or with Hamas, and sometimes with the terrorists in Judea and Samaria. Nobody expected us to be able to not only last, but to continue. And by the way, the public in Israel had always, in every one of these instances, especially the 17, in 19 years, 17 exchanges with Hamas in Gaza. Every time the population in the south of Israel told the government, we'll go through everything, we'll do what is necessary, we'll be under attack, but finish the job. And it was never done. And now it's happening. And you can say, and one of the things I tell you, I'm very pleased to see is this propaganda coming out of Gaza, of images of Gaza the day before, which was this wonderful Middle Eastern Riviera, which day before that they were telling us how it's an open air prison, but now it was this Riviera, and how it looks today, which I personally and a lot of Israelis take absolute pleasure in watching, the total destruction of the Gaza Strip, which they brought upon themselves. Because in the Middle East, it's not enough being identified as being powerful. You have to show it. And in Israel, I can tell you, and anybody who's been here can verify that, our life continues with the pain, with the sorrow, but it continues very normally. Economically, we're very sound. The people here are still mobilized and still willing to stand up to our enemies, because we had always said for generations, since World War II, never again. We are no longer helpless. We are no longer victims. And if you try to do this to us, we're not going to sit aside and be dependent on the goodwill of the international community. And the international community has also, many governments and many people demonstrating, have also shown their true colors. They could care less what happens to us here. And standing up with terrorists right now, and with these horrific individuals and organizations, and supporting them is totally despicable. But we don't care. You know, they can do whatever they want. We're responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for the lives of our children. And we sure as hell are going to take care of that and make their lives the hell that they wanted to make ours. So when I see these images of Gaza, and I see what is happening in Lebanon, and what is happening the past few days in Syria, what's happened in Taiman, in Yemen, and also in Iran, and we haven't even used, and I'm saying this with total authority, we have not used a half of our abilities yet. And we have not shown what our total capabilities are. And we have been not restrained, but we've kept the best for last. And the best is coming up, and the Iranians are going to pay the consequences for their plans for the past 20 years. They have a clock in Tehran, which had the date and a countdown to the date in which they're going to destroy Israel. That clock is going to be the timeline for their demise. And they're going to be witnessing what happened to Syria very soon themselves, because we've had enough. We've had enough of years of them constantly trying to destroy the state of Israel. And if there are those in the international community that have a problem with it, fine. You should have been as confident as you are with criticizing Israel and standing up to Israel. You should have done it against these terrorist regimes that you can see a little of what is happening in Syria now. And over the years, nobody opened their mouth. You see what is happening in Iran. How many Iranians are saying to the international community, look at what is happening to our people here? Nobody's saying a word. Just like they're not saying a word what is happening in the Sudan now against Christians, or in Nigeria. The world doesn't care about these things. So with all due respect to them, we'll do what is in our best interest. And that means eliminate our enemies, because never again is now.
Well, Danny, looking at, by the way, I saw an excellent video last night from Channel 4 News, which I think is out of the UK. I'm not sure. Detailing these mass burial sites within Syria that the Syrian regime had used against its own people, some of them containing upwards of 150,000 or more bodies in one area, and the people describing the smell from these areas that lived in. It's just it's on the order of magnitude of it's war. It's crimes against humanity on an epic scale. And the one thing I've noted is that as I've watched the Syrian civil war unfold, we were in the north of Israel along the Sea of Galilee in March of 2011. And I got up in the morning and checked the news. We're staying at a resort there on the south end of the Sea of Galilee. And there was this report of these disturbances taking place on the streets of Dara, riots, which was really the start of the Syrian civil war. So, and that was only 30 miles away from where we were. Yeah. We were sitting at a very beautiful, pastoral, beautiful morning, and Syria was literally breaking apart just right across the border. But and so we know that there's certainly over 1 million dead Syrians. There's millions of refugees. It's had an impact on Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey. But there are no protests at Columbia or Harvard or Yale about 1 million dead Arabs in Syria. But, let Israel defend itself and the world melts down. So it's a stunning thing to watch me to see. So let's unpack Syria a little bit. And when we talked a month or whenever it was, we talked about the multi-front war that Israel's facing, and Israel's having great success in Lebanon, a great success in Gaza, handling situations on a daily basis, even multiple times a day in the Judea and Samaria with the terror cells there. But I guess the thing that is a little bit hard for those of us who watch. Well, we heard Iran, we're strong. We're going to get you. We're going to do everything against you. Russia is here helping. Israel's doomed for destruction. And then these rebel groups, which I think are much better prepared than the ragtag groups that are trying to portray in the media. They've been training and planning this for quite a while, looking for an opportunity. Why did Russia and Iran just sort of walked away, it seems? Why didn't they step in? Were they a paper tiger?
Well, yeah, John, this, I have to go into the whole. Syria was not an independent country, at least for the past 10 years, as I mentioned before, since that civil war that went on there. And you had elements such as the Iranians and the Russians moving in. Now, certainly, Russia getting caught up and failing miserably in the Ukraine made it more difficult for them to be able to continue supporting Assad. And the Iranians, now with the demise of Hezbollah, they lost their greatest force in this area. Now, people have to realize there's not a lot of love lost between the Shia and the Sunni. And the greatest war within the Islamic world is between the Sunni, who are about 60%, and the 40% Shia, who are basically represented by Iran. And that to them is a greater battlefield. If they can use Israel in the battlefield against Israel to sort of raise themselves up in this mutual battle, then they'll do that. But they're more concerned with each other. So in Syria, which is a Sunni majority country, the Alawites took control over and were very vicious against them. And all these self-righteous posers in the West who have found the cause that they can demonstrate for, a bunch of losers who really, if they really cared about humanity and about people, would be standing up against these ruthless dictators. And they're not. And they're probably, to a large degree, funded by them and funded by these elements of Islamic society who've taken refuge and, in a way, have invaded, to a degree, the United States. And I'm hoping against hope that you don't have an October 7th. And remember, October 7th does not have to be the demise of the United States. And 9/11 was not the demise of the United States, but they hurt the United States severely. And now you have elements who support terrorist regimes and the Iranian regime in the United States right now, operating freely. And the United States is a huge, huge, huge country. You know, Israel itself is about the size of New Jersey, and the Gaza Strip is about half the size of that. And we had difficulty getting and gathering all the intelligence there. The United States is vast, and you have areas there that are the size of Iraq that you don't have, and you don't know who's roaming around the forests and taking refuge there. And who knows what's behind these different things that are happening right now with these unmanned drones that are flying around. I don't want to make any insinuation or any innuendo towards anything, but you don't know who's planning what. And these elements are being funded. And by the way, one of the funders supposedly is an American ally, which is Qatar. The biggest funder of Hamas and Hezbollah have been the Qatari regime. They're a Muslim brotherhood. Anybody who understands what the Muslim Brotherhood is about understand that they are a jihadist motivated organization. And the funders for this have been Qatar. And the Americans have a military base there. That's why they maintain this relationship with Qatar. But Qatar has taken advantage of their relationship with the United States to advance the elements of Islam, which are important to them. So this is just a side to people remember that you have greater things on your own doorstep that may or may not happen very soon, but you have to be aware about the potential. And so in Syria right now, you have these elements that are finally taking action against the Iranians. And since the United States withdrew its forces from Iraq and then from Afghanistan, and even beforehand from Syria, this didn't create a democracy. This didn't create peace between these nations. It only encouraged the most extreme elements to try to move in and take over. And ISIS, though they may call them in different names right now, they have a restoration of their abilities there. which is no way good for the civilian populations in these areas. So it could be that the United States was assisting these elements to overthrow the regime that was being supported both by Iran and the Russians. This could very well be what was behind this whole thing. We'll only know later on. But I think the good thing is that with the Trump administration coming in, everybody knows that they can't take advantage of the United States as they have in the past, or at least in the past 4 years. So this will work to the benefit of everybody. And there are those, again, the self-righteous who talk about, look, it's much rather have the United States in control of the world than these terrorist, murderous organizations. And they are no way are they peaceful, or no way are they woke, in no way are they trying to benefit the world. They want to murder the West more than even they want to murder each other. And therefore, if the world is controlled by the United States, it's better off for everybody. Just look at Germany and Japan, how they flourished since their own murderous regimes were soundly defeated by the United States. So here the same thing is happening. And you can see that one of the consequences of Israel's actions in the past year has been to make it clear to these elements in the Middle East that Iran is not as strong as it portrays and projects itself as being. Hezbollah no longer exists, and it's time for them to stand up and defeat these regimes that were protected by these two elements. In addition to this, you're having cries coming out from Islamic leaders, religious leaders in Lebanon, in the Arab world, that are questioning now what has the Arab world gained in the past 75, 76 years from constantly concentrating on trying to defeat Israel. What has Lebanon benefited, and what did the Hezbollah benefit from the fact that they concentrated on trying to defeat Israel? What has the Shias anywhere, has Iran benefited from this whole concentrating their efforts against Israel? Not only have they been defeated, they don't no longer exist. Hamas, okay, they'll fire a missile here and there, but they're no longer the threat that they were before. They certainly can't advance any Islamic jihadist ideals anymore. Certainly the Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they all are starting to understand this and seeing what Israel has projected. They might now be focused on creating livable conditions for their own populations. By the way, as they saw happen in the Arab Emirates and in other Arab countries who focus more on developing their societies and not trying to defeat and fight against each other.
Let me, by the way, I have one of those red alert apps that I follow, and it's been amazing that everything seems to have stopped in the north in terms of rockets from Hezbollah. Is that a fair statement?
No, yes, they haven't succeeded. It's not that they haven't tried to. What happened, unfortunately, in the past, I would say since the Yom Kippur War, certainly after the Lebanon War and then Oslo, was that too often Israel did not respond like it should have against these terrorist elements. You know, when we withdrew from Gaza, which was not with an agreement, it was something that Israel decided to do on its own. And there were those who were defending this decision were saying, if the Hamas will fire one missile, this is literally what members of Knesset said. If they fire one missile at Israel after we withdraw from Gaza, it'll be the end of that. It never happened. They fired nearly 100,000 missiles over the past 20 years. And here and there, Israel would take action, but we never, and then you would have a ceasefire. Now, people calling for a ceasefire forget that there was a ceasefire since May of 2023, June of 2023, until October 7, 2023. There was a ceasefire. But every time they would violate it, sometimes immediate, just to get the last word in, they fired the last missile. They stood up to Israel, and Israel wouldn't respond. What you see different happening with Lebanon right now, since the signing of the ceasefire, is that every time Hezbollah forces moved into South Lebanon, in the areas they're not supposed to, according to the agreement, we took them out. In Lebanon, for example, after the Second Lebanon War, you had UN Resolution 1701, which is binding, by the way, because it was a Security Council resolution, and it was defended by the United States and especially France and the EU. Yet The EU and the forces, UN forces there, ignored the fact that Hezbollah were moving into South Lebanon, so they didn't have uniforms and they didn't have the military equipment that they were showing, but everybody knew that it was Hezbollah, and building tunnels next to the UN positions, and the UN never did a thing against it. So with this ceasefire, we said we have nothing to do with the UN. The French cannot be involved. We do not want anybody there, and if there is a violation, we'll take care of it until such time as the Lebanese army takes responsibility, moves in and takes responsibility. In the areas the Lebanese army has moved into, they've been able to keep the areas clear. Other areas have not been in. Just yesterday, we moved into a town just north of Rosh Hanikra in Israel to remove the presence of Hezbollah there. And anything that they're doing, we're responding immediately. And this is going to be the situation, I have to say, hopefully, because unfortunately, Israel itself and the governments in Israel over the years have not been, hopefully, they'll continue with the policy. And if not Netanyahu, after he's finished, they'll do this even after Netanyahu. Netanyahu learned the hard way. So any future government will learn the hard way from the people of Israel, will no longer tolerate or accept this. It will no longer be acceptable for us. And so that's making sure that there is a possibility for this treaty to go on. The fact that in Lebanon they haven't succeeded is we took out all their infrastructure, and for them to fire in our direction now, they have to move back in, and we were able to identify this and take it out in advance. And we'll continue to do that.
It's been a it's been an amazing operation. I mean, I think didn't the IDF come out and say that in the year since October 8th, they did something like 700 operations into southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. So it almost seems to me that there's a divine element here that, because there were a lot of concerns expressed by people that I've interviewed that, there could be hundreds and hundreds of dead Israelis with regard to the situation in the north, and none of that seems to have come about, and that's a blessing for Israel. I'm going to put up a map here in just a second. I want you to talk about what Israel has done in Syria since the Assad regime fell. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Just from what I've seen myself and from what I hear and what I've spoken to some of the experts in preparation for my own show in Israel, so at least I sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I sort of talked to a few people. That's pretty interesting. These are the what you're seeing in the blue on the Golan Heights. That's the Golan Heights, and these are areas that were. Then you have that line going down there in the middle of part of the blue, and that's the area that was after the Yom Kippur War. There was a disengagement. Well, not a disengagement. There was a treaty signed. At the end of Yom Kippur War, we were 7 miles away from Damascus, the capital of Syria. And after you had in Egypt, you had the Kilometer 101 negotiations with the Egyptians, and in Syria there were negotiations also. With Israel withdrew to certain areas. And it was a demilitarized zone and an area that over the years, unfortunately, the Syrians restored and moved in, sometimes with the support of the Iranians. We did take out a lot of them over the years, especially Iranian elements there. But what you see right now is, now that the Syrian regime no longer exists, our agreement was reached on this realignment, was reached with the Syrian regime that no longer exists. So the treaty no longer exists. So we moved back into these areas that allow us for greater protection of the state of Israel. Now, these areas are basically, you have a Druze minority in a vast majority of this area there. And they themselves, you have up there, and then south, along with the border with Jordan, if you move a little south to the southern tip of the Golan Heights, right there. So you see Jordan is on the bottom, and from the Sea of Galilee is the Golan Heights to the right. And then you have Jordan there, and that area is also Druze, that blue area there. And they have requested to become a part of Israel.
So in the Druze areas, I know they're right along the Golan Heights. In fact, this has been an issue, I think, for a long time. The division after the 67 and 73 wars, the division of Druze in Syria from Druze families and clans or whatever that now ended up in Israel. And I know that over near Dara, there's another big area of Druze. Is it the Druze along the Golan Heights that are asking to come into Israel now? Is that where they're located?
Yeah, they've proclaimed the sovereignty. Now, the Druze, for those who don't understand, they never declare independence. There are Druze in Israel, northern Israel. There are Druze in the south of Lebanon and areas in the eastern Lebanon and in Syria, of course. And they usually serve the local regimes. They don't believe in their own independence for whatever religious reasons are involved. Too complex to get into at the moment. But it's just that, and they're known to be very loyal to the countries they serve. I remember us going into the Shuf Mountains in Lebanon back in '82, and the Lebanese Druze there, knowing the relationship between the Israelis and the Druze, and the Druze were the first minority in Israel to accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel and become part and partners in this country, in the state of Israel, and serve. They're not, they don't volunteer, they serve under the law at their own request to serve in the military, and have been known to be wonderful commanders and partners and brothers in arms. And they are literally the brothers. And it also goes back historically. They see themselves as descendants of Jethro, who was connected to Moses. And therefore, there is a bond connecting the Jews and the Druze that go back centuries. So when we were in Lebanon, we never feared the Druze there. We knew they would never take up weapons against us because they knew of the bond between the Druze and the Jews in Israel, and knew that we would never, they weren't a threat to us in any way. So we had a very nice relationship with them. I even took a letter from an old person there who said his brother is in the Golan Heights and they haven't spoken in 20 years. That time you didn't have social media and things like you have today. So I took this letter. I gave it to my parents. They drove up to the Golan Heights and met the family, and they were so excited, and they hosted my family there. It was a very nice relationship developed with them there, and he had contact with it, and then sent me a letter that I gave him. They had not heard from each other for a long time. So this is the kind of relationship we've had with the Druze for many years. But the Druze in the Golan Heights, knowing about their families in Lebanon and in Syria, and knowing how the Syrians would treat, were very clear. Though they were given, Israel annexed the Golan Heights to Israel, and this was recognized by the United States under the Trump administration, and they received citizenship in Israel. Many of them did not receive it, and accept it under the concern that their families would be harmed in Syria. In the past 2 weeks since the fall of the Assad regime, many of them have turned to realize their Israeli citizenship, and now their relatives in Syria are asking Israel to defend them and take over and become part of the state of Israel. So we still have to see how this works out. Right now, we're more concerned in preventing any terrorist elements in Syria to be able to. Syria had a very significant military capabilities. So we're taking that out at the moment. And that's what Israel is focused on, is first off, the chemical weapons that and facilities that the Syrians had, long-range missiles, ballistic missiles, all these things that were moved in, and destroying the routes that were coming in from Iran into the Hezbollah in Lebanon, preventing that from happening. So we've been able to destroy all their capabilities in Syria.
I don't think that people really grasp. I mean, the size of Syria compared to Israel is it's many times larger, 3.5, 4 times larger than Israel.
Yeah.
But Israel has this, I don't know how they do it, this amazing ability so that as soon as things started to unwind and the Assad regime fell, Israel moved in to take out all of the Syrian military weapons, missile stores, chemical missiles, Navy, all of that thing. Now, one of the arguments that I hear, and I'm only passing this along because I think this is total nonsense. People claim, well, see, Israel was in on the fall of the Assad regime because the rebels, the terrorist rebels that have taken over Syria now, they haven't attacked Israel. So Israel must be in on the plan. What's your response to that?
Let's put it this way. There's a saying in Hebrew, "Zeh nevela v'zeh trefa," a curse on both their houses. But for a long time, the Syrian rebels realized that Israel is not their enemy, and we've never taken them out. We were actually very helpful, and our hospitals served a lot of the Syrian civilians during the times of the massacres that were going on, and Israel helped the civilians in Syria. By the way, just so nobody gets too excited by this lovey-dovey story, even people whose children were served when they went back and even here in Israel, I happen to know this personally because I did PR at the time for the hospital in Haifa, who treated a lot of the Syrian civilians. And I had a CNN team there interviewing them. And they asked the mother if she's very happy. And she said, yes, she's very happy for that the Israelis are treating her children. And they asked her, well, okay, will you go back to Syria? She said, no, the Jews are our enemy. And I'm grateful for I give it credit to her that she was still honest. But that shows you that even in Israel, you can be critical about Israel, even while we're serving and treating and giving medical help to your son and helping you where we're not obligated to do it. And still, she felt comfortable enough with us, to be honest, that in her eyes, we're still the enemy, and she'll still fight Israel. So even if we do have these elements in Syria that realize that we're not a threat, I take it with a grain of salt, and we all have to remember that. They'll do what is in their best interest, and we have to keep up in doing what in our best interest. Now, for too long, people here in Israel and people in the West believe that the root for peace is everybody gathering together, singing Kumbaya, my Lord, and living together in peace and harmony. It's not the way it happens. Here in the Middle East, they have to realize that they don't mess with you, and you're too strong to defeat. And you can have relations, and you can work together, and you can live side by side together. But I go back to these pictures that are coming out of Lebanon and coming out of Gaza, and sending a very clear message to all these people who thought that they can take on Israel. If you don't want what happened to Gaza to happen to you, then you better live side by side with us, because we'll focus on our own lives, we'll concentrate on ourselves, but you have no ability to take us on. And by the way, the Quran said it very clearly that the Jews have a special place and they should not be taken on by Islam, and that Islam would not have been there without Judaism. And so they should better take on the truth of the Quran and not what it's being interpreted by the extreme Islamists. And Israel has its place here, and they should respect Israel's place. And if they do that, they won't end up like Gaza. It's very simple. It's very simple. They can demonstrate in the United States, and you can have these students whining and yapping like chihuahuas about it. But they brought it upon themselves. There are consequences in life. And if you mess with somebody who can do this to you, and they're still yapping about it. There's still these Arabs who go to the United States and free Palestine from the river to the sea. We're still the same as we were on October 6th. The ones who have, and by the way, Gaza is built on sea sand. And the tunnels that they built and have been destroyed now make it impossible for them to restore and reconstruct buildings there. The sand there has become sort of quicksand. So many of them are not going to have where to go home to. So maybe these people in Europe and in the United States who want a free Palestine can host them at their homes in the meantime, because in Gaza they have nowhere to go back to.
So I think I saw Hamas demanding this morning, or saying this morning, that they've given up Israel. They're willing to give up this in return for the hostages. They don't demand that Israel completely evacuate the area of Gaza, but they want people to return to northern Gaza. And what you're saying is it may be difficult for people to return to northern Gaza because of the destruction that's been visited.
We've allowed them. Look, they can put up a tent there. And we've seen them putting up a lot of tents. And I'm not being facetious right now. I'm talking about the reality. They can build a tent there, but they won't be able to build these buildings at the end. How long can these people continue living under these conditions? And by the way, I don't feel bad for them. I don't feel bad for them under any. They are paying the consequences of their own stupidity. And their stupidity is not that, you can feel sorry for an idiot, but their stupidity was trying to kill my children. So you may want to edit this out, but screw them. I'm not hiding that. You come to kill my kids, your life is going to be made as miserable as I can make it. And this is what Israel has said to them and is showing them. So I don't know how long these people are going to be able to live under these conditions. Now, regarding Hamas, for a very long time, people were saying about the hostages. I don't take it lightly. It's very painful. I've mentioned this before, and how everybody knows Naama Levy, because unfortunately she's famous from the images of her being dragged from the Jeep. She's a friend of my daughter's. So anytime I see her, I see my daughter. And we've long enough in the past year in Israel have come to know the families of these hostages. So we all care about it deeply. But we're not in a hostage situation. We're in an existential situation. And by that, I mean we have to be very careful. Now, that said, we're coming to the end of the battle in the Gaza Strip. So we can make more concessions now that we couldn't make a year ago. And also the Hamas themselves are more willing to do things that they were. So this may mean, and by the way, myself and many Israelis, I'm not talking about right now those who we have captured and taken since the war, who these are people who have to stand for crimes against humanity. And this may happen after the war is over. But before that, there were around 8,000 terrorists imprisoned in Israeli jails before October 7th. So many of us say, fine, let them go. But for all of our hostages, every single one of them, alive or dead, we want them all back. So take all 8,000 of them for the 101 Israelis. We're willing to do that. And that may be acceptable right now, though they're still insisting on only partially. Here, we don't believe that those not released now will ever be released again. So we can't allow that to happen. So we're going to be insistent on that. And that's something the majority of Israelis agree upon. And I don't know any, even hostage families, that can argue that their children will be released and not the children of somebody else, knowing very well that they may not be released eventually. So now is the opportunity for us to make whatever concessions need to be made, except leaving Gaza, because that will mean the restoration of Hamas. We can't do that again. And so there are things happening right now, and there's a lot of information, just like what happened with Lebanon, a lot of information that the public is not aware of. I'm not aware of. And I said this in my briefings before and in my radio show to Israelis, that Prime Minister has information that we do not have. And after we finally moved into Lebanon, we found out that we were operating there and getting intelligence, and our commandos were fighting Hezbollah even before anybody was aware of that. So it's very good that there's a lot of secrets still being maintained, because you don't have to talk about these things. And this information has to be in the hands of those who have to make the decisions. And with all due respect to the different analysts and all these people demonstrating, they're not the ones who have to live with this decision at the end of the day. At the end of the day, this is beyond any biblical or Greek tragedy. It's the prime minister, whatever he does, there are going to be consequences for others afterwards. Some of the hostages may not be released. Some terrorists may then take and avenge themselves and murder Israelis. There will be painful consequences either way. There's no good ending to this story for some Israelis eventually. And therefore, I tell these people, shut up, let the person who has to live with the consequences of this decision make the decision based on the information that he has. And because I don't know. I couldn't live with that decision, whatever it is. He's going to. I give him power to be able to do that. That's why he's the leader of the country and not these people yapping about it on the media.
Okay, let me just ask you a couple things. I know we're sort of running up against your time limits, and I really appreciate you taking the time. What do you perceive as the sort of the threats that remain in Syria, like Turkey, Iran coming back? How do you view that space right now?
And if we take the future of what you can't anticipate, you can't prophesize about it. But Iran, it's sort of a done deal already. Iran will be taken out, or at least their nuclear capabilities have to be removed. Whether or not this will be done with the United States or not, it has to be done with the United States. And the United States has to be. Israel is not the leader of the Western world, and we can't continue doing what the Western world should have been doing, because this threat is not only Israel. We represent to these elements, these extreme elements, we represent the Western world to them. So them taking us out is only the first stage. And by the way, if they succeed in toppling Israel, it only encourages them to do the next stage, which is to finish off the West in whatever means they have at their abilities. So Iran will definitely, it'll happen within the next few months. So now, there's no power vacuum. There's no power vacuum in the Middle East. There's no power vacuum in the world. Somebody's going to move into Syria. Whether or not it's the Syrians or not, it's not clear. But what we do know is that before the West took control and shaped the Middle East after World War II with the Sykes-Picot Agreement, there was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is Turkey. Now, I stress this again, there's Turkey, because the Turks are not Arabs. And the Arabs, even though the Turks are Muslims, and even though the Persians are Muslims, Persians, Iran, the Arabs do not appreciate neither the Persians, Iran, nor the Turks in Turkey getting involved in the Middle East. But the Turks want to restore, and I'm saying this because the president of Turkey has made it very clear that he wants to restore the Ottoman Empire. And by doing that, the first stage is going in, and he's already annexed. While everybody's focused on Israel and complaining, and I'm saying complaining because the French have already filed a complaint against Israel. While they're complaining about Israel, nobody's saying the fact that Turkey has already annexed territories from Syria to Turkey just this past week. And they've already reached an agreement, and they have a bond which they claim to already have an arrangement with Egypt of a joint agreement between the two countries. And Egypt has been violating, for the past few years, the Camp David Accords. I'm going back now to the Camp David Accords of 1979. And the Egyptians have been, and the United States are the ones who are supposed to be making sure that this agreement is not violated. The Egyptians have been moving in forces and materials and building infrastructure in the Sinai in violation of the Camp David Accords. Who are they building into the Sinai against? It's only Israel, despite the peace treaty we have with them. And this is being encouraged by Turkey. Now, Turkey is also a member of NATO. So the United States has a huge say in what is happening. If Turkey is doing things there and using their military, which is a part of NATO, that's in violation of their agreement with the NATO forces. So if it was the Biden regime, I would have been concerned. I'm more confident that with the Trump regime, the United States will make sure that its commitments are kept in the Middle East. So we can anticipate action happening by Turkey, trying to get involved there, and also with Egypt. But Israel is not the Israel of before October 7th. And we will not tolerate in any way any elements that are trying to threaten the state of Israel. And by the way, the Prime Minister of Turkey has threatened Israel with military action. So we just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and well, I'll talk more about on my channel about some of the things that the foreign minister of Turkey has been running around saying in the media, which are certainly not friendly to Israel, I guess is the best way of looking at this. So I really appreciate taking the time. And I know this is kind of a big issue that I'm going to open here and we'll never get to the end of it. But comment on the political situation in Israel, if you can, with the trial of the prime minister and what's going on there, and just sort of explain a little bit about what's going on and maybe where you see it heading.
Well, again, it's very hard to determine right now. I can say this: the public in Israel are now focused on the war, its conclusion, which we should see within a few months, and defeating our enemies. Then we have to turn our concentration on what led to the failures of October 7th. There was rumors, and that had been verified, of a spy in Israel, in the military, on October 7th. His name is Shmuelevich. We have the name. The guy has been apprehended. He's in the jail, but he was connected to, and has connections to, the Israeli left wing and to the Israeli court system. And therefore, the courts have found him, after his arrest, they found that he was unable to, for psychiatric reasons, to appear in court. And many Israelis see this as being an attempt to hide this. Everything I'm saying to you right now has been verified and confirmed. Who he was actually, we know he has connections with some of the Israeli military, members of the military. We know that these people have connections to an Israeli politician. Who exactly, there are rumors, who exactly has not been revealed. It has been confirmed that it is an active Israeli politician. They have not confirmed the name of the person. There have been several rumors as to who that person is. There's also said that that person has connections to the American administration. What we do know, and has been confirmed, was that the damage caused by that spy on October 7th was that Israel knew that on October 7th, the hostages, or most of the hostages, were being held in Shifa Hospital, underneath Shifa Hospital, and most of the heads of Hamas were taking refuge in the hospital itself. Israel had planned, we're preparing a plan that within 48 hours, the IDF would rescue these hostages there. This information was brought to the attention of Hamas, not clear if by Israeli elements or through the American administration. That much is not known. But we do know that they were given a heads up and therefore took the hostages out of and left Shifa Hospital itself. All of this are things that have been confirmed so far. So with this happening, the Israeli people and the government, and Netanyahu, I say not government because elements in the government have demanded this to be addressed. Prime Minister is focused on finishing the war, soundly defeating our enemies. And most of the public want that to happen as well. Once this happened, then we direct our attentions to who it was that betrayed the country and why there was a failure in the Israeli intelligence and military. For this to happen, we cannot get involved in elections. Now, there's been an element of the left wing in Israel that since the moment that Netanyahu was elected over 13 years ago, that do not accept the vote on the part of the Israeli civilians. A lot of the people listening to this for years would have said, oh, that's very preposterous and that's very strange. I think many of you understand what I'm talking about because you've been witnessing the same thing happening in the United States over the past few years. So you have this element that does not accept the elections. Here in Israel, it's a bit more complex than the United States because there you have elections once in every 4 years. Here you can topple a government within the period. Elections are every 4 years unless in the politics there is a vote against the government falls, they cannot form another government, and then we have to go to early elections. So there's this element in the left wing in Israel who succeeded in doing it between 1918 and 1922, 2018 and 2022, for 5 years, you had 5 different elections in Israel until you had Netanyahu elected and created a very stable government that we have at the moment. And the supporters of the parties in this government, they have at the moment 68 seats, majority of 120 members in the parliament in Israel. These parties understand that their supporters do not want us going to elections and will not support these parties if in any way they fail. Now, we've been 2 years since the elections, 2 years, and in 2 weeks, it will be 2 years since the forming of this government. But the next elections, the official elections in Israel, are scheduled for November It's around the time of the midterm elections in the United States. So in November of 2026 is scheduled the next elections in Israel. The vast majority, and don't listen to what you're getting from Haaretz newspaper or from the foreign media that base their information on what they're getting from Haaretz newspaper in Israel. Haaretz newspaper is a fascist, left-wing fascist newspaper who do not accept the democracy in Israel and the democratic decision of a majority of Israelis. So anything you're getting from them is tainted politically. The owner of that newspaper has been very open and openly said that he supports Hamas resistance and understand why they did what they did on October 7th. There should be a curse on his house and on his family, and maybe they be the victims the next time that anybody tries to do what was done to families in Israel on October 7th. The guy is an embarrassment to journalism. So just so you know who you're getting the information from, because 100%, when I was the director of the government press office here and polled the foreign media, 100% of those who responded to our poll said that they get their information from Haaretz newspaper. So I'm assuming it's the same today. But most Israelis do not go with that. Most Israelis today want the war to be ended in total, absolute victory and the total demise of our enemies, because we don't want to go through missiles anymore and terrorist attacks anymore and anything that we went through in the past 20 years. That is no longer, no country in the world will tolerate it. We no longer want it to be tolerated. We do not want our children going through that. We don't want a third generation. We had two generations. And I can speak for my own family that my nieces and nephews who are in their mid-20s now suffered from PTSD, living in Ashkelon and going through these missile attacks every few months. And now they have their own children who with October 7th have been experiencing this as well. There's no reason, no country would accept that their children have to go through that. We're not willing to tolerate that anymore. And it's not only the south of Israel, it's what the north has been engaged with in the past few months. So that is no longer acceptable to Israelis. And this is what we expect our politicians to be engaged in. Instead, they're engaged in trying to topple this government, declaring internationally that it's a fascist regime and that they're a totalitarian. They're trying to impose. No, Israel is a democracy and was elected by a vast majority of Israelis who want Netanyahu to be prime minister. And all this attempt to use the court system here to try and the court is a farce has been coming out. And it's interesting, the same media who were quick to accuse him and say that he's an accused prime minister. I thought, what happened to the principle of innocent until proven guilty in a Western society? They sort of throw that out the window. And these journalists who were very quick to say that Netanyahu is accused of this and that, when the evidence in court was showing how ridiculous this is and how it was politically motivated for the Attorney General's office to take him into, just so you understand, one of the most ridiculous things he's being accused about is getting positive media or trying to convince journalists to do something right, something positive about him. And tell me a journalist who doesn't do that. You know, anybody involved in Israeli hasbara, in public diplomacy for Israel, what do you think I did over the years with the different media outlets, if not try to get them to do something positive Israel? So they should, and any spokesman of any government and any relationship they create with the journalists, what do they think it's do? Because they like these journalists. The journalists, I've worked with them for many years. Most of them are total self-absorbed schmucks. I wouldn't want to be friends, and I'm not today since I left government, not friends with them. There are few individuals that I have respect for, but most of them do not uphold principles of professional journalism. And the only reason I was in touch with them is because I wanted them to report positively or at least fairly about the state of Israel. They didn't even do that. So the prime minister is being accused and taken to court for trying to get good media, bribery. That is the most ridiculous thing. And this is what he's being taken to court over, one of the issues. And the other things are also falling apart in court. But then the media doesn't report that, at least the left-wing media. Now that he's back in court, they went the first day, but since he's been giving testimony and tearing to shreds, they're not reporting it in the left-wing media in Israel. So it's all a farce. So again, it's hard to estimate, at least the next year, I would say a year and a half, there will not be elections here. And this is important also because you have and you have the Republicans in control of both houses of the Senate, at least for the next until November of 26. That's the timeline we have. Not that the United States will do for us. They'll support anything the government in Israel decides that is in the best interest of the state of Israel. And we, the people, should be demanding of our government to do what we believe is the right thing to do. And this administration will support that. So this is what we have to look forward to. And it's not a long time. A year and 9 months is not a long time. And Israel should be focused on doing that and what is in our best interest to not only end the war with total victory, but to complete the package in getting what will make sure that Israel is safe in the future, and that anybody having an idea of assaulting Israel or attacking Israel or having a clock in the center of their town that will clock with a countdown to the demise of Israel will decide that it's not a good idea anymore. And that's what we have for the next year and a half to address and take care of. And hopefully our politicians will not do anything foolish and leads to the downfall of this government before that time.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today, Danny. It's been, as usual, very, very informative and helpful to people that follow our channel. And I look forward to doing it again in the future. Israel's on our thoughts and prayers. I know it's a very difficult time, but we'll do this again in the near future. And who knows? Maybe we'll be talking about the demise of yet another government that is an enemy of Israel in between now and then, just like Syria fell.
A lot of things are happening. A lot of things will be happening soon. I want to thank you and your listeners and viewers and the people who support the state of Israel. I can't express the gratitude that we have, understanding that there are those. The media focuses on all these who are demonstrating and all the noise made by these fringe groups, and not what the most Americans, like most Israelis, most Americans understand what is the right thing to do. And most people understand what is the just thing to be doing. Most people understand the basis. And it's not by mistake that the United States and Israel have such a strong connection, because the United States is built on the Judeo-Christian values. It's the only Western country based on those values. The Americans do not hide it. It's not a religious country. But the principles of the United States are the Judeo-Christian values, the liberal values that emanate from the Bible. So it's not a mistake that our two countries are so bounded together to spread the word of the Lord to the humanity, all humanity, to let them know what is right and what is wrong. And the Americans have been, since its inception of the United States, has been that beacon of justice and what is right for humanity. Have there been mistakes? Yes, but that is not. The real essence of the United States is what the goodness in humanity is supposed to be. And there's been no country like the United States. I'm grateful to have been born there. I'm grateful to have my roots in the United States. And I'm grateful to be part of the magnificent state of Israel and the people of Israel and the Jewish people who have been the keepers of that fire of God for so long, for over 3,000 years. And we'll continue to do that with the help of the American people. And we'll continue to move forward and bring the word of God to humanity.
Danny, great thoughts. Thank you. And we'll look forward to it in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.